this is Tim Markley from Keith Altman Law, and you are listening to the Legally Blind Justice Podcast. If you've gotten into trouble in school, you may be surprised to know that you need a lawyer. More students than ever are finding out that what they thought was not a big deal is really a life-altering event. Students who thought they could just work it out with their school or their professor are being expelled, suspended, or placed on probation. On this podcast, we will discuss those issues, tell you where to find help, and explain how the system works. Now, this is our first foray into podcasting, so forgive us if we make mistakes. We'll figure it out as we go along, and you can email comments and suggestions to me at timothymarkley@kaltmanlaw.com. Today's guest is Rich Gill. He is the managing director for Keith Altman Law. He is a former administrator with extensive knowledge of school education issues at both the K-12 and secondary level. Rich, thank you for joining me today, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dr. Markley. I'm really glad to be here. This is a new foray for me as well, but I'm hopeful that we can reach lots of students that might need to hear what we have to say today.
All right. We purposely started this first podcast around the time students are returning to school. We find that when kids go back to school, they run into a lot of issues. Talk to me about those kinds of pitfalls that a student can have when they're coming back to school this fall.
Oh, absolutely. So I think the first thing I'd like to talk about is the transition from high school to college. I think a lot of young students that are leaving high school are going to find themselves in situations in college that were very different than what they had in high school. In high school, they were typically living at home under the roof of their parents and guardians. They got a lot of support from their teachers for a variety of reasons. And suddenly they're sort of thrust into this new world of independence in a large organization that they're not used to. So that transition can be particularly problematic for young adults. And my one word of recommendation would be that you really understand the rules that guide your behavior and your schoolwork in college, because they may be very different than they were in high school. Similarly, we work with clients that are transitioning from middle school to high school. Again, oftentimes that means a building change, a change of administration, a change of rules, and a different level of responsibility. So, it's really important for young students to understand what rules are guiding them and just do their best to keep their noses clean in a variety of areas, not just behaviorally, but also academically, because we do deal with a number of clients that have had academic integrity issues, and they don't really even know that they had done anything wrong, and they're being held accountable.
I have a little too much to drink one night and I make some bad choices. And all of a sudden I've got some kind of complaint or allegation hanging out there. What do I do?
Well, I think the first thing that you need to do is be careful and cautious, and don't put your trust necessarily in the school to take gentle care of you, right? Many, especially universities, they have some pretty stringent rules and regulations around alcohol consumption and behavior. And there's always the assumption that all of their students have read the student handbook, understand the expectations around them, attended all the orientation sessions. And the reality is many students don't do any of those things. And so they don't really understand that what they're doing is not acceptable. So once again, as I stated before, understand your responsibilities as a student, but if you do get into trouble, ask for help and don't expect it necessarily to be coming from the school, because they may just be looking to enforce their rules.
All right. Do I need legal advice?
Sometimes you do, absolutely. Some cases can be fairly substantial and they can put your future at risk.
Can you give me an example?
I mean, if you violate school's alcohol policies and the school finds out about it, you can be discharged from school and lose the tuition that you put into it. And suddenly you thought what your future looked like at a particular institution, and now you're finding yourself facing the possibility of dismissal or severe sanctions from the university, which could include things like not being allowed to be involved in extracurriculars or sports or things of that nature. So yes, you should go and try to find a advisor to support you. And oftentimes the folks that are best prepared to do that kind of support are law firms. But they're not your only option.
So what is Kale Law? What do they do? What's their area?
So I think the unique sweet spot for Kale Law is that the folks that help students that get in trouble are not attorneys. They're educational professionals like yourself, a prior superintendent, like me, a prior administrator, K-12, who have seen these scenarios play out from the other side and understand the type of things that the schools are trying to enforce and can advocate for you. That said, we are a law firm, so not only are we capable in the area of education, but we have access to attorneys who can give us advice and give you advice on legal matters like Title IX, dismissals, things of that nature.
All right, so I hear a lot about Title IX when I go to my orientations. What is Title IX?
So Title IX is a federal law that is in place to prevent sexual harassment in schools and in the workplace. It's basically a law-driven procedural process for how accusations of sexual harassment in school have to be performed by the school. And it involves investigations and unbiased hearing officers and advisors during hearings and things of that nature. So it's a relatively complex process because it is driven by federal laws. And if you're involved in a Title IX case, you should absolutely be reaching out to a law firm to support you, either as a complainant or as a respondent.
All right, so this isn't something that I can just use whatever college professor they assign to me to help them with.
No, as a matter of fact, the requirement for the school is to provide folks charged with Title IX abuses with an advisor, but that advisor doesn't have to have the type of training that a law firm would have, like Kale Law. So we've run 100 or more Title IX cases in the last few years. So we're very familiar with the processes. Oftentimes, we are more familiar with it than the school themselves is. A regular advisor assigned by the school is typically going to be a college professor or a college staff member who may have been to one hearing or a couple in that advocacy role, but they really don't understand the Title IX laws well enough to offer a suitable defense. If one of my children were involved in a Title IX case, I would absolutely hire an attorney to protect their rights.
Now, you've helped students in a lot of different cases. Give us an example of a case that you were the advisor on that you helped the students get a positive outcome.
So I think one of the cases that I enjoyed the most was we had a client who was a third-year medical student, and the student it was just after COVID. The student had spent her first 2 years doing her work remotely, and she had a sibling who had relatively severe, without going into any details, but relatively severe emotional issues. And she was the primary caretaker when she was home because her parents worked. When she departed the home to go to school full time after COVID and school reopened, life at home with her younger sibling sort of went backwards, right? She wasn't there to support her sibling. Her parents were working. The house was torn up. There were lots of issues. Not only that, but the sibling would call our client and tell her that she was a terrible person for leaving, and that she didn't love him anymore. Anyway, as a result of that entire process, as you might expect, our client struggled academically, and had done fine for the first 2 years, but in their third year struggled because they had so much of that going on in their home life, and they were diagnosed with depression and anxiety as a result of some of that home life stuff. Without regard to that, the student failed 2 classes in her third year of medical school, and the school's policy was you fail 2 classes and we throw you out. So this particular client came to us when she had already been dismissed from the school, and she was looking for our help to get her back re-enrolled and restarted in her third year. And fortunately, we were able to do that, working through the school's general counsel. But I think without our help, she would have ended up 2 years into a medical program, several $100,000 in debt without a medical degree. So that's one of the cases I'm most particularly proud of.
All right, Rich, I want to thank you for being with us today. As we grow this podcast, we'll dig deeper into these topics, share other areas of the legal world that we think will be of interest to you. And finally, if you get into trouble, you should seek legal advice. The school or university has complex rules, policies, and procedures to govern the process. They have legal staffs to advise them, and you should as well. Thank you for listening to the Legally Blind Justice Podcast. If you have a legal question, give us a call at 1-888-984-1341 or check us out on the web at kaltmanlaw.com.